Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the Mad Mamluks. My name is Sim. Along with me is my co-host Summer and Irtaza Hassan. His first episode as a Mad Mamluk host. He was one of the original founders of Al Maghrib Institute. You can read or learn more about him on our special episode we did with him called the Al Maghrib Story. Amazing dude. Welcome, Irtaza.
Thank you, Sim, Summer, and Umaima. It's a pleasure to be with you guys tonight, and great to be back on the show.
Well, Irtaza, you know the most about Umaima's story here. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Umaima and how you got to know her family?
Sure. I would say I probably know the second most after Umaima, but I totally get what you're saying. I've known Umaima personally since we were kids. I would say it's kind of a true story of where almost our whole families are best friends with everyone else in the other family. My mom and Umaima's mom, just to give you a brief story, they are the first ones who met. It was in the mid-'80s. Houston was a 2-newspaper city back then, and our moms worked together at a place called the Houston Post. And once they became good friends, they later introduced their husbands, our dads, and Umaima's brother, real close friend of mine through childhood, elementary, middle, high school, college. Umaima's sister I know very well. I recently took a trip to Greece with her as part of a voluntary effort to support some of the Syrian refugees in Greece, which she was the leader. That's Dr. Uzma Jafri. I've known Umaima for years, not just as a family friend, but also she was my colleague at the Al Maghrib Institute office in Houston. That's the headquarters. Umaima was not only involved in Al Maghrib's operations, but also in Iman Rush. So she was kind of on both sides of the fence. I know her husband, I know Ibrahim, I know her kids. So Umaima is definitely someone who's a close family friend and someone I've known a long, long time.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Umaima. We're really excited to have you here to be able to talk to you one-on-one about this, difficult situation that you're going through. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
So that's actually also where Umaima and I met back in the Houston Al Maghrib days where they used to have their headquarters. And I remember over the summer we were studying during Hifz, and then there were just a group of girls who were like, hey, guess what? Al Maghrib's headquarters is here. And my jaw just dropped. I was like, what? There's a headquarters? And we go in and mashallah, it was so amazing. I met Umaima and then all the different girls that worked there that summer. And it was immediately like this bonding moment for me, at least. And those friendships have really like lasted in my memory as like what a good friendship is like, amongst Muslim women. So
that's true. Alhamdulillah. Like I met you just that summer. You were an out of towner. You weren't even one of the Houston girls.
No.
But we kind of adopted you. So alhamdulillah.
Yeah, I was so grateful for that. I had no other like Muslim friends. I didn't even know like there were different ways to wrap a hijab. All I had was like the almira that you put on, the one piece. And I was like, what? You guys have to show me. What's all this hijab wrapping about?
Oh, yeah. That was back in the day where we were all like hijab fobs.
Yeah.
So, Umaima, walk us through what happened. I mean, some of our listeners may have heard your story through the recent Muslim Matters article that you wrote explaining about your husband's detention and the story that is surrounding it. But for the listeners who haven't heard, can you give us a brief background of what actually transpired leading up to the events?
Sure. I can't promise that it'll be brief. So I published this article at Muslim Matters. I think it was early November. And what happened, it just kind of snowballed after that. I really didn't expect that kind of response from people. Alhamdulillah. We also had a petition that went with it that we presented to the judge about releasing Ibrahim. So basically, that article was just a snippet of what's happened in our life in the past 2 years. In November 2015, Ibrahim was arrested from our home in Dallas. Prior to that, in 2011, we were raided by the FBI. And, unfortunately, there are many Muslim families who have experienced something like this. It's very traumatic. If they haven't experienced it firsthand, they've known other people who have. So you might have heard a story like this where, the FBI just comes in the morning and they bang on your door. It's a knock. It's not even a knock. It's not a doorbell. It's literally somebody pounding so hard that you feel like your heart will just kind of burst out of your chest. It's very frightening. It's very traumatizing. So early morning in 2011, it was the winter of 2011 actually, and they came banging on our door, and I actually saw them from the window upstairs, and our front door actually didn't have a peephole or a window or anything next to it. So my husband, just opened the door without really checking to see who it was. And I just kind of flew down the stairs and threw myself up against the door and shut it again. And, they very calmly were like, you have to open the door. You have to let us in. I said, I don't have my hijab. And they're like, you're welcome to go put it on. So
wow, you had that frame of mind, even in that moment, to say, shut the door. Don't let these guys in here.
Actually, you know what? The way it replays in my mind, it's in super slow motion. I can recall myself. I don't remember running down the steps. I just remember being on the top and then suddenly being on the bottom. So I literally flew down the steps, and the front door is right at the bottom of the steps. And I just hurled my body up against that door. And I remember screaming to my husband, no. And so imagine screaming no in slow motion and saying, no, don't open the door. And then he had just opened the door. And they don't really wait for you to open the door completely. They'll just push on the other end, which is what they were doing. They were pushing themselves against the opposite side of the door. So I went ahead and I threw myself against that door and shut it. And, your mind just kind of goes into, fight or flight mode. So mine was, I have to buy myself a few seconds. And the first thing that came to my mind was I have to get my hijab on.
That's insane.
So I ran back up the stairs, weak-kneed, no blood in my body, and with trembling hands, I put a hijab on. I had a 6-month-old baby at that time, just lying on the bed, cooing early in the morning. And then they came right upstairs, and they pronounced my name very properly, which never happened in my life.
Right.
They're
finally, someone can say my name right, but
you know
you
what?
Guys.
Yeah, it wasn't as exciting as you would think.
Yeah.
So, they're like, Umaima Jafri. And I was like, yeah, that's me. And so the very first thing they said, they're like, we're not here to arrest anybody. And so, I a little bit of blood rushed back into my body. My knees weren't so weak. And I was like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, we'll tell you once you come on downstairs.
So at this point, sorry, just to interject a little bit, but at this point, had you guys had any clue that something was going on, or that they were suspicious of neighbors, of other people in the community even, or none?
Zero,
this is just
nothing.
Out of nowhere.
Out of the blue, completely out of the blue. Just in the past, my husband and I would read up on cases. You hear of this Muslim man being arrested or that Muslim man being arrested, things like that. I mean, Irtiza can even, tell you about a guy or a couple of guys actually in Houston that we knew who were arrested, so it's things like this about. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why I was, initially I was very defensive with them. Actually, the whole time they were raiding my house, I was very defensive. Mm-hmm. And, when I came downstairs, the very first thing I told my husband was zip your lips. Don't you dare open your mouth. Because you actually do have the right to remain silent.
Yeah.
So, and then, they split us up. He went and sat in the dining room and I sat on the couch, and we had a galley kitchen separating the two. So I could make direct eye contact with him at that dining table. And they were there for several hours. Oh my gosh. It was horrible. They opened up every drawer. They looked in every nook and cranny. They opened up cereal boxes and cookie jars and gallons of milk. You name
gallons of milk? What
everything.
What are they looking for in there?
Fridge,
that's where we keep our explosives, in the milk jugs.
No, that's where the uranium is that they were looking for in Iraq.
That's where that expired milk is that'll kill you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I actually had my phone, and all I was doing the whole time was show me the warrant, show me the warrant, show me the warrant, show me the warrant. Because, so many times you've heard about, those care workshops where they're like, know your rights when if the FBI shows up at your door, you actually have the right to refuse refused to allow them into your house. You know, they're not allowed to enter the house. But, you know, when you have like 20 agents pushing against the opposite side of the door, you got nothing else to do.
Right.
So they kept stalling. They're like, yeah, we'll show you the warrant. Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, it's coming. Immediately I was like, I want to call a lawyer. The only lawyer we had at that time was an immigration lawyer because my husband, we had gotten a lawyer when we got my husband's green card, years ago. So called him, got an answering machine, and then I just started calling my dad. I was pretending I was calling a lawyer, but I was calling my dad. And I was speaking to him in Urdu. And after the second phone call with him, like he understood immediately what I was saying. I was like, Daddy, there are guys in my house and I need help. That's all I said in Urdu. And he understood. And then like maybe a minute later, they're like, we need your phone. And they took it. And then I turned around and I saw this guy standing behind me. And it was like this Desi uncle who was translating. And then he heard me on the phone and went and told them. So that's when they took my phone away. But my dad was, he was very efficient. He acted right away. My parents had some of my friends' numbers, in Toledo, and they called everybody they possibly could. So within like maybe, I won't say right away, but like 4 hours later or something, they were able to get a lawyer who was just a Muslim guy from the masjid. He was an immigration, or he was actually, he was a traffic lawyer, whatever, you deal with tickets or parking tickets, right, stuff like that. So he showed up at our door and we were able to leave with him while they continued searching our home. Wow. And then an hour and a half later, we showed back up at home. Then they gave us the warrant. And that warrant actually had a condition, had a stipulation that said they didn't have to present it to us until after they were done searching the house. I didn't even know those.
There's loopholes for their misbehavior, or they could bypass laws.
Oh yeah. Totally. I mean, for these guys, special privileges, special laws, anything, anything can be done in their favor. So that was our raid. My husband was given a subpoena to show up in front of a grand jury within a week. And so we were scrambling to look for a lawyer, and we found a lawyer, I think within 24 hours, who was a local guy in Toledo by the name of David Klukas. And he was able to actually set up 2 proffers. So they offered us proffers, and a proffer is where actually the government speaks first. And they'll tell you what they know, and then they give you the opportunity to tell them what you know, and they give you, it's not really immunity in the sense that, you'll never be charged, or anything you say can and won't be held against you. It's basically the opportunity to hear their side of the story first. So, my husband cooperated. We had our lawyer. We went to the FBI office in downtown. He sat with them. He answered their questions. And after the second proffer, they said, we'll catch up with you in another 2 weeks. We'll sit down again for another meeting. We're like, sure.
I want to pause you right there. I'm just wondering why you guys didn't contact CARE or somebody who's more trained to handle these type of cases?
Because it's a federal case.
Okay.
It wasn't a case about civil rights, and which is what CARE handles for the most part. Okay. And frankly, and this is something I know obviously in retrospect. Now, I mean, I can say we were very ignorant. When you're put through such a traumatic experience, I won't say all your common sense falls out of your head, but you're just shaken up. And we got that lawyer, and he was like, do not talk to the FBI. Do not talk to them. And he told them, my client will not speak with you. And it was then that they offered to sit down and proffer with Ibrahim. So, I mean, honestly, I don't think CARE would have been able to help at this point. So, after that second proffer, they were like, we'll touch base again in a couple of weeks. And so at that point, I asked our lawyer, I was like, do we have to spend these couple of weeks in Toledo? Because we were really traumatized. I wanted to get away for a little bit. So he was like, you know what? Go take a vacation down to Texas, take your time, and then fly back up in 2 weeks. And that's what we did. We went to Houston. We chilled with family. We came back in 2 weeks. We called the government. Our attorney called the government and said, hey, it's been 2 weeks. And they're like, we're busy right now. We'll get back to you. So it was a really long gap of 4 years where we heard absolutely nothing from the government. Nothing. Our attorney even contacted them every now and then. And he was like, hey guys, if nothing's happening, can we just drop this? And they're like, yeah, we're not really interested. The original prosecutor on the case went and got a job at this multi-million-dollar firm. He was done with the case. It just seemed like they weren't interested anymore. They completely dropped the ball. They disappeared.
That totally puts your guard down.
I'm sorry?
That totally puts your guard down. You're like, okay, all right, everything's kind of wrapped up. We're okay now.
Yeah, initially we were treading on thin ice. We were very careful. Every time our family was growing. At the time we were raised, I had 3 kids. We moved from one townhouse to a slightly bigger townhouse within Toledo. And then a couple of years later, we moved to Michigan. Every time we moved, we consulted our attorney. Like, hey, can we move? And he's like, yeah, sure. Live your life. So we, very hesitantly, we moved to Michigan. We're like, okay, alhamdulillah. We lived there for 2 years in peace. No big deal. Yeah. And then, my husband got a better job in Dallas. It was, Dallas was an up and coming, booming community. Yeah. I'm a Texan girl, so I wanted to move back to Texas, whether it was Houston, whether it was Dallas. I didn't care. It had to be Texas something. Yeah. So, we moved to Dallas in August of 2015. Great school for the kids, great job for the husband. We were looking to buy a house. Everything was great, alhamdulillah, And then all of a sudden, in November of 2015, we had only been in Dallas for 3 months when, there was no doorbell. There was no pounding on the door. My husband opened the garage to put out the trash, and like a dozen men just charged right into the garage. Oh. And at that point, the garage door was right by my master bedroom door. I had no hijab on, and I just went outside. At that point, I was like, hijab was an afterthought. And I went outside, and I was like, give me that warrant. And they actually did this time. They actually handed me a warrant. And
wow.
So yeah, he was arrested then.
On what charges?
So, you know what? I actually forgot to mention that when he got the subpoena in 2011 to stand in front of a grand jury, when we proffered with the government, they went ahead and canceled that subpoena. They retracted it. And they're like, okay, you don't have to go in front of a grand jury. Basically what happens when you stand in front of a grand jury, you're not allowed to have a defense lawyer. You're not allowed to have any witnesses, nothing. It's a jury, it's a judge, it's a prosecution, and the defendant. And there's a saying in the legal world that you can indict a ham sandwich. You can indict anybody on anything.
Right.
So in 2011, basically Ibrahim was guaranteed of being charged. So the fact that they retracted that subpoena, we were able to we had a sigh of relief. So fast forward to 2015, when they gave us that warrant, then I saw, it was a 72-page indictment. And he was charged with conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists. 2 of those charges are actually kind of the same. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, conspiracy to commit bank fraud. So there are 4 charges like that. So at that time, they arrested him. They took him to the county jail. He was to be arraigned in front of a judge in Dallas, and we attended that. And, we were really naive. We were like, okay, so when does he get to come home? And they gave him a public defender who's like, you know what? This case is based out of Toledo, and it's best that he gets transferred. When he gets transferred back to Toledo, I should say, is when you guys should, petition for bond, because the judge, this Dallas judge, who sees Ibrahim as, a foreigner to Dallas, basically, is not going to give him bond. So then we waited a whole month while Ibrahim was extradited back to Toledo. And he was charged along with 3 other guys. One of them was his brother, and the other 2 guys are also another set of brothers. So it's 2 sets of brothers, basically. And so all 4 guys were basically held at the county jail in Toledo. Well, I don't know how. Go ahead.
Well, tell us a little bit more about Ibrahim himself. Like, what kind of person is he? Has he ever been involved with anything that would cause suspicion, the skeptic listener of ours would message us after the show saying, well, they didn't obviously pick his name out of a hat. He must have done something or said something that irked them and, that caused them to look more at him.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, that is a person's first, the initial reaction is like, oh, did he actually do it? Like, what happened? And we might do that too when we read the news about something. So Ibrahim is, he has zero criminal history. He became a permanent resident of the U.S. In, was it 2007? After we got married, we applied for his green card. In 2014, we were applying for his citizenship. And we waited that long because when we were rated in 2011, we were really nervous and we weren't sure whether or not to apply for his citizenship, only because they do a background check, right? They do the FBI background check. They take your fingerprints, and we were like, for sure it's going to come back with something. But when we applied for that citizenship, that background check came back completely clear because he was never charged with anything until 2015. He has no criminal history. He was always a very
So just to be clear, he's a U.S. citizen. Actually,
what happened, he was arrested in November 2015, and just maybe the following Monday, we got the letter in the mail. I got the letter in the mail from Homeland Security saying he passed his background check. We're ready for his interview. Basically, we were just like 2 steps away from his citizenship being finalized.
Wow.
And so whether or not that was a coincidence, we don't know. Okay. Did they arrest him deliberately before he actually became a citizen? And if so, what does that prove? Like, how does that strengthen their case? Is it just to prove that he's an immigrant coming in? This is why we should have a travel ban. Right. This is why we shouldn't let immigrants in because they're about to, cause terror in our country. Is that why they did that? Or was it just pure coincidence? I ask myself that question all the time. I really don't know why it happened when it happened.
I think that's such prevalent. Sorry, I think that's such just a prevalent mindset, right? Especially in America, because nationalism is so strong. And if you say I'm a human being, that actually has less weight than if you say I'm an American.
Yeah.
Right.
Whenever you have that blue passport or whatever, you say, yeah, I'm a U.S. citizen. Immediately, like, Americans will give you more respect, and I don't know legally how much weight that holds, but the predominant culture is just, well, if you're American, you're one of us, and if you're not, you're one of them, right?
Exactly.
So to other him, you're right, it may just sound better for their case to keep him as an other.
Exactly.
Just to continue off of what you were saying that he's a compassionate guy, never done anything wrong in his life, but what organizations was he working for? A lot of times people who are working for Islamic organizations, they're usually targeted by the FBI for some kind of impropriety involving money apparently going through back channels to some kind of shady organization overseas. So tell us a little bit about what he was involved with before marriage or even leading up to it.
So before marriage, he only ever just kind of volunteered at his masjid, on the dawah scene, not part of any official organization, just maybe his local MSA. After marriage, same thing. He was just involved in the masjid. He would lead tarawih at the masajid. He would teach little kids Quran. He was that generous guy that everybody knew. This is one of the questions actually that our attorney asked me when I took the stand as a witness at our first bond hearing in 2016. He asked, what organizations was your husband part of? He was part of zero. He was part of he's an engineer. My husband is a civil engineer. And he did his master's in Urbana-Champaign. So he was part of some, National Structural Engineers Association of America, one of those types of organizations. Right. And that is it. Everything else was just like, oh, somebody in the community needs help, just help them. Somebody needs a new car. Okay, let's just get them a new car. Somebody needs a ride in the middle of the night. He was that type of guy. He was a guy who would mow the neighbor's lawn, when they weren't looking, just because he knew how busy they were, or he noticed they were busy. So it's, help a neighbor, take somebody to the airport in the middle of the night, because they needed, they had like a 5 a.m. flight. It was just, normal stuff that we do every day to help each other.
Yeah.
And that was my husband.
I think
And
that's
that
sorry. I just think that's like one of the most chilling aspects of the story, of your story, is that, someone who is so kind and so generous and going above and beyond to always be helpful to their neighbors. That's what we keep hearing, right? As Muslim Americans, that's what we need to do to be accepted. That's what we need to do to show people that we're not dangerous. We're not a threat. We're not, terrorists. And yet here, amazing people like your husband who are doing that, who are, walking the walk and talking the talk. And yet those are also the same people that are, being arrested and held on these, frivolous charges.
Yeah. I mean, if you have the time and the energy to read the 72-page indictment, you will not get a sense of Ibrahim's personality, right? It's fear mongering, it's Islamophobia. It's like, oh my God, he was this kind of terrorist. He said these types of things. In the indictment even mentions that he listens to jihadi nasheeds. And the one nasheed they mentioned was Ghuraba.
Oh
right?
my
And
God.
Ghuraba is a nasheed that's been
Everyone
around for
listens to that
centuries,
nasheed.
Right.
and people know it. And it's like, really?
Yeah.
Like that makes him a terrorist because he listened to Ghuraba. So do I, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, it was.
One name that I keep on throwing out there, on at least in the news articles and things that are anything pertaining to your husband, is Anwar al-Awlaki's name, and that he was somehow financially connected to him. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the four charges I mentioned was conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists. So when Ibrahim got arrested, like I said, there were 3 other guys who got arrested, one of them being his brother. And his brother, in July 2017, just this past July, pled guilty, and he was sentenced to 27 and a half years. When these guys were first arrested, there was a lot of pressure from the prosecution to take a plea deal. Take a plea deal, because that's how cases in America work. It's like a assembly line. You show up in court, you plea, you kick this guy out, and next defendant comes in. So, 97% of these cases in the entire justice system plead out. So when none of these 4 guys were pleading out, the government gets a little nervous. Like, okay, now we actually have to come up, the burden of proof is on them. They have to come up with the evidence, and they have to take this to trial, and they have to spend millions of dollars on trial, and they have to, defend their costs and all that. So because nobody was playing out, they entrapped my brother-in-law in the jail in Toledo. And they supposedly recorded him saying all sorts of crazy things. One of them was that he was attempting to murder the federal judge sitting on the case.
Do you mean like they had his roommate pretend to like ask him?
Yeah.
Wow,
So
like straight from Hollywood type stuff.
Yeah, it was this felon who was in and out of jail all the time. Like if you saw his record, it would be like a mile long. And our attorney's like, oh man, I represented this guy like 10 years ago. And then my colleague represented him 8 years ago. He's in and out of prison. So for this guy, he's like, ooh, let me, go ahead and wear some recording devices, record this guy, or, reel him into saying certain things, record it so I can get a lesser sentence, which he did. So when that entrapment case happened, it was basically like, okay, you're charged with attempted murder of a federal judge. That's life in prison.
Wow.
So this guy literally is not looking at freedom again. So he did take that plea deal. And so he's serving 27 and a half years. So this brother is actually, kind of, I don't want to say the head honcho, because when you think of a head honcho, if you think of a leader, you think of somebody intelligent. I won't say that's his brother. He got caught up in some stupid business schemes. Basically, he got hustled out of thousands of dollars, where he thought he was investing in a business, where he thought he was donating recording, I guess you could say, equipment to send to Anwar al-Awlaki. And at that time, and this case is like old. Okay, we're talking 2008, 2009. And if you know anything about Anwar al-Awlaki, he wasn't designated a terrorist until until 2010. So Anwar al-Awlaki gets released from Yemeni prison, and, his supporters are like, oh, great, alhamdulillah, he's out of prison, out of Yemen. Let's support him. And so his brother was one guy who was like, okay, I want to help the sheikh. And he tried to collect money. That's where the other two guys come in, where supposedly they were like, okay, we'll help you, buy some recording equipment, because, Anwar al-Awlaki was famous for his Sira lectures.
Right.
The Medina series and the Mecca series, those were really popular. And it was at that point where my husband's like, well, you know what? I'm not contributing. He's like, I'm not sure exactly what you're buying, and I'm not sure exactly where this money's going. I'm not helping. I'm not contributing. And that's in the indictment, where my husband's like, I want nothing to do with this. And that is literally his entire role in all of this. So
when his brother was entrapped in prison, did he say anything to implicate your husband?
No. He didn't implicate anybody else.
Okay, so they have literally nothing on your husband, and he's being held on these charges of
material support, conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists.
Right.
Obstruction of justice is very broad. It could be anything. It could be like you didn't. Gosh, one lawyer told us that obstruction of justice can be you didn't open the front door when they banged on your front door.
Right.
Even though you had the right to keep that door shut, if you didn't open that door, that's obstruction of justice. So what Ibrahim did to get that charge, really, we don't know. We're just
they don't have to provide explanations behind each of these charges?
No, because if you read the indictment, all they're worried about is the terrorism, right? That's how, they win over a jury, is fear-mongering, is Islamophobia. They don't really need to provide anything. When the Patriot Act, went into effect right after 9/11, signed by George Bush, signed by Dick Cheney, the Patriot Act basically gave them free rein to spy on people, to arrest people, to detain people, without any jurisdiction. It was literally a green light for them to do anything they possibly want, which, what Summer said initially was, oh, they have loopholes. Yeah, there are tons of them, because they're allowed to have these certain privileges, like I said before. That's what the Patriot Act does. So you can charge a guy with anything. And if you put the word terrorism or terrorists on there, like, khalas, that's all they need. So, going back to the charges, my brother-in-law, he's the guy they really want him to plead. They really want him to cooperate with them, which means you cooperate with us, we give you a better deal, and you testify against the three other guys. And they're going to all four guys offering this deal, and nobody's going to say anything against the other guy, because they're like, nothing happened. My brother-in-law got hustled. Whatever money he thought he was donating for some recording equipment was actually stolen by the guy who pretended to know Awlaki.
Are there bank records of him
thief.
like that show, okay, look, this guy gave me a check for $2,000 and I basically put it in my own bank account? And
yeah. There was a hustler that, who stole the money. And, there were two guys where, they each got a cut, and, the money went nowhere but in their pockets. But that's enough, and what the government does, it's something called, inference stacking. They're not allowed to inference stack. They're not allowed to infer the fact that these guys intended to give Awlaki money, and Awlaki intended to use it for whatever, horrible things or whatever acts of terror that he was planning on. Whether or not anything took place or not, it's the intention. So the brother intended to give it to Awlaki, and Awlaki intended to, blow something up. That's all that matters. No act of terror was committed. No crime was committed. No weapons were purchased. No weapons were exchanged. No money actually got to Awlaki. It just doesn't matter. It's the fact that, it could have happened, so thus we must lock these guys up for life. That's all it is.
And it speaks to a bigger question of who is allowed to disagree with what the government is doing anymore. If at any stage you can't even think, wow, the government shouldn't be doing this, then that means that you had an intention to block the government, right?
Mm.
And like, then what? Then you could also be arrested for thinking of having this intention, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's so many Americans out there that disagree with America's foreign policy, that disagree with the way they handle so many things. And now with Trump, just everything, right? There's millions of Americans, more than half the country disagrees with him. But if anyone has the intention to do anything against it, then that's what makes them, terrorists. It's just becoming so...
I mean, if you think back to, like in what I wrote in the Muslim Matters article is like they prey on people who are either, have some sort of mental illness, who are loners. They will never by themselves think of any sort of plan, any sort of, of the plan to hurt people or cause any sort of terror. But this informant comes in, plants this idea, plans the entire scheme up to the last minute because they know no one's going to get hurt, and bam, they arrest this guy. Oh, he intended to blow this up, or he intended to hurt these people, or he intended to blah, blah, blah. And nothing happens. What happens? He ends up in life in prison. That's a max security prison.
And it's ridiculous because I feel like it's just a plot to show, look how efficient we are. We're catching terrorists left and right.
Exactly what it is.
And continue this fear. Hey, you never know. Even the nice guy mowing your lawn could be, so never trust a Muslim. And I feel like that building of antitrust has culminated so much. And it wasn't even that bad when 9/11 first happened. But now it's been like 16 years of that fear mongering, of that Islamophobia.
Yeah. I mean, they have to keep it up, right?
Right.
They have to keep selling the product.
Right.
Back in World War II, it was the Japanese, put them in internment camps, Japanese Americans, they're the enemy, Japanese. And then, in the 60s, it was the Red Scare, right? It was Russia, it was communists. Modern day, it's the Muslims. That they have to make excuses for why they're still in the Middle East bombing countries, why we're spending, how much are we, $8 trillion in debt, probably more now.
Yeah.
Why are we spending trillions of dollars in the military? We still have to defend that. Why are we still sending our men over there to die in a war that it's just going on for, like you said, 16 years?
Yeah.
You have to defend that. You have to keep selling the product.
Umaima, just getting back to your husband, Ibrahim, has there been any evidence that he, was a listener or a fan of any sort of Anwar al-Awlaki? Do you think this might be some kind of retribution for him being even, a supporter of his in the smallest amount?
So when we had the bond hearing in 2016, that's something the government cross-examined me on. Did you guys listen to Anwar al-Awlaki? Yeah, we did. Can you tell me how many people in the Muslim world did not listen to al-Awlaki back then?
Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands.
And they're like, one of the questions they asked, how do you get a hold of the CDs? They're readily available.
I was in Podunk,
online,
Mississippi.
You go to conferences.
And I listened
to. We used to go to ISNA. We used to go to ICNA. We used to buy CDs.
Everywhere.
Back when CDs, were not obsolete like they are now.
Right.
Yeah.
But, we used to buy these CD sets. So I was like, it was a big deal. We used to buy CD sets by al-Awlaki because he was a great storyteller. He was captivating. And, he reached a point where he kind of, became a radical and started saying weird things where all of us were kind of like raising an eyebrow and saying, okay, this is kind of like, what is he saying? Like,
Umaima, I just remembered my wife, she listens to Anwar al-Awlaki, but she can't even pronounce his name right. Back then, it was Anwar al-Awlaki, and she listened to it because he's a great storyteller of the Prophet's stories, or the Stories of the Prophets series that he did. But I'm sorry, going to interrupt you. You were saying,
and that's what I told the prosecution. I was like, he was very popular in the Muslim world. I mean, even after 9/11, didn't they do a special on him? I don't know what news channel, maybe 2020 or Primetime or whatever it was. They interviewed him, where, he condemned, any sort of acts of terror. And so, he was mainstream at one point. When he radicalized, that was 2010. So any investigation that's going on with my husband's case is way before he became, he showed up on the radar. And so now we question the fact, like, okay, we listened to him back then, We didn't listen to him around 2010, 2011 when we got raided. What's your beef now? But it's just the fact, like, you did at one point, you could have done something. It's the same story. It's the same narrative over and over again.
And now that Oloki is not even here anymore, he was killed. And
well, is this a justification?
Still, right?
You kill a guy, you kill a U.S. citizen without trial, without his day in court, which is illegal.
And his son.
Who
had nothing to do with him. I mean,
16.
Yeah. And now, are you trying to justify killing him? Like saying, oh, look, he trained these terrorists. And
this was his network.
Just like the same thing with the Fort Hood guy.
Yeah.
The same thing with the underwear bomber on the plane. Yeah. They attempt to tie both of these guys into our case because they're like, look, they were radicalized by Oloki. So were these guys. And it's just, it's a very weak narrative. It's very flaky, evidence. And it's just, what are you going to do? All they're doing is selling, Islamophobia. That's literally what their product is.
It also happened in our community where, in this Chicago suburbs, there's such a dense Muslim population. You always have the FBI sniffing around. And right around 2011, the FBI came knocking at actually my in-laws' house, and they were looking for my husband. We had just recently moved out to a townhouse, and they were like, where is he? And my father-in-law brought them over to our townhouse. And, this was like when we had first moved in. We didn't even buy any furniture.
This is right after the underwear bomber.
Right after the underwear bomber, and this is after Oloki had been killed. This was like the day after or something. And they wanted to come into our house, but literally we had no furniture. So my father-in-law's like, yeah, the kids just moved in. How about we take him back to my house and we talk to him there? My father-in-law, subhanAllah, he was really intelligent. He kind of knows that they're going to be looking at everything at our house. So he's like, okay, let's just take him back to our house and question him there. And my heart just dropped. I was like, oh my God, where are they taking him? What are they doing? And we were actually leaving that same day for my sister's wedding in Mississippi. So when they came in, they see an empty apartment and like 3 suitcases all open with everything that we have in there. And we're like on our way out. I'm frantic, like, don't take him away. We have to leave. We have to go to my sister's wedding. And they took him. And at this point, like, it was so early that he hadn't looked at his phone. I hadn't really seen what was going on in the news, but I kept checking my phone. Like, is something going on? Like, why are they here all of a sudden? And I saw that Anwar Oloki had just been killed. And that's what the primary reason was for questioning him. They were like, well, we just wanted to see what's the pulse on the community. How are people feeling? And he's like, about what? He didn't even know.
Yeah,
he didn't even know
really think we care.
Yeah.
They really think we care. Like, I'm not going to say somebody getting murdered is not something to care about, but it's not a topic of conversation. Like, one thing they asked me on the stand was, did you guys talk about it at the dinner table? As a family, did you talk about Oloki? And I was like, excuse me, why would I do that? And they were like, don't you guys talk about things? I was like, no, we got 3 kids, man. We got better things to talk about. Why are we going to sit here talking about, just an imam? Like, it's
between
literally
3 kids, really? You think we're going to talk about Anwar Oloki? My kids don't even let me talk about anything.
That's like somebody in modern day saying, oh, did you talk about like this, conspiracy with this imam or this conspiracy with this, whatever happened in the news? No, we don't. Nowadays, okay, we might be like, okay, we're talking about the administration.
Look, these guys are so clueless, and I'm sure they're listening. That I see a lot of downloads from Virginia and stuff, so I'm sure they're listening. And if you guys are listening out there, you guys got to understand you're really clueless about our community. And I'm watching this show called Mindhunter on Netflix, and it's about a show that has FBI agents who are learning about serial killers when very little known about them, and there was no profile built about them. And these guys aren't even scratching the surface about understanding the problems or where some of these terrorists are coming from, and they're trying to pin the blame on average Muslims who are just normal people who are contributing members of society, and good people like your husband Ibrahim.
as I'm listening to me, I agree with what Umaima said about, they're clueless in terms of what they think our dinner table conversation or our day-to-day conversation is. But the other thing that got me about Ibrahim was that he was just, a normal guy. There's an Ibrahim in every community. Ibrahim, and I've met him and interacted with him many times over the years, but he's not the guy in the masjid or the community that's the loudest guy, or necessarily the guy that, in a very large gathering, he'd be the first guy you'd remember or the first guy who'd stick out. But he was a guy who was active in his masjid. You'd see him for salah, you'd see him come by. Anytime there was a visiting scholar, visiting guest, they'd know him. He knew the brothers who were involved in stuff, who were active in classes, in teaching, in conferences. And, he was just a good brother. You have folks like that in Chicago, Houston, Dallas, that, the community's happy to have in their community. And I feel like one thing that affected the community, besides affecting Umaima's family personally, is people just turned around and they really scratched their heads, where it was like, they're going after guys like this. Don't get me wrong, and I don't mean to sound insensitive, but there may be people over the years where, they got taken in, or they got taken in for questioning, or they got even locked up for something, where you're like, okay, you can kind of understand that one. You can kind of see, what might have happened there. I'm not saying anyone deserves to be locked up, but I'm saying there's some cases where you could say, okay, I kind of see where that happened to that brother or that sister or something like that. But with Ibrahim, it was more of a shocker because everybody who knew him and kind of knew his demeanor and personality just knew that he was anything but a threat or someone who wished harm for the community or harm for the government or the country.
Umaima, how's he doing in prison right now? How's he holding up?
It's not easy. 2 years. It was 2 years just this past November, and his 4 kids are growing up without him. He's in a county jail where other inmates tell him that this is actually a hard time. Federal prison, you get movement, you get computers, you get to walk around, you get to go outside. County jail, you're literally in a concrete block, no windows, no sunlight, no fresh air, anything. Just 24 hours a day. And that's the least of his worries. How he sleeps or what he eats is the least of his worries. It's just, being away from his family, which is very hard, and my mother-in-law, who's older than 75 years old, and both her sons are locked up. The fact that her older son was sentenced, we haven't even told her. We're just like, we still don't know what happened with him. Because, if she found out that her oldest son got 27 and a half years, she's going to have a heart attack.
Oh my gosh.
And so with Ibrahim, it's just, I told her we had our 3rd bond motion last month in November. It's been a month and a half and the judge still has not ruled on it. So every day she's like, is there a ruling yet? Is there a ruling yet? Is there a ruling yet? Every day the children are like, is Baba coming home yet? Is Baba coming home yet? You said Baba might come home. And I did say that. I was like, look, we're going to this. And I actually took 3 of my 4 kids. I left a toddler at home. I took 3 of my older kids to the bond hearing this time. So the judge gets to see them. That these are the little human beings that he's missing out on. And they are literally the only ones that can make him smile. So instead of sulking on that defense table, he was smiling because he kept turning around looking at his children.
Aww.
It's hard. I have a 4-year-old. Our youngest is 4. He wasn't even 2 when Baba was arrested. So he's half his life, Baba's not here and he's young. How much do you expect him to remember? But, he was not feeling well today. We're traveling actually right now. He wasn't feeling well and all he's crying. He's like, I want Baba. I want Baba. And, part of me is like, how does he even remember? But my heart, it's this immense feeling of relief that, okay, alhamdulillah, he remembers his father or he knows some sort of concept of a father. So it's hard. It's hard for the children. I can tell you,
we're tearing up listening to you over here. How are you holding up? What can we do as a community for you, to help you out in any way possible? I know our fan base, our listener base is very passionate and they're always looking to find a cause that the Mad Mamluks is behind. And, I know they'll be right behind you in anything you need. So please tell us what we can do for you right now.
What you can do for me immediately is, on change.org, we have that petition. Keep signing that petition. Keep sharing that petition. We have a Facebook page called Free Ibrahim Now. Keep liking that page. Keep sharing our posts. Post something on there, encouraging. The number one thing you can do is keep talking about Ibrahim and keep talking about guys like Ibrahim who are also detained, who have also been sentenced, who have disappeared, who people have forgotten about. There's Ali Tamimi, there's Abu Ali. There's how many more guys are there in Gitmo, man?
Yeah.
We have to keep these things in conversation. There was just recently, 2 days ago, I was in Maryland and I was going to Washington, D.C. to attend the trial of a guy named Nick Young, who was a police officer in Virginia for 13 years. He converted to Islam. As soon as he converted to Islam, they entrapped him in a case and he just got convicted. It was a 3-day trial. This trial should have been like 3-4 weeks long. It ended in 3 days. The jury barely deliberated before they came back and they convicted him.
And
this guy's like 30 years old.
Yeah.
This still happens in our country, and it's 2017. It's 16 years after 9/11, after 2001. Why is Gitmo still open? Why are Muslim men like these still getting arrested? Why are they still being detained? Why is there no due process, violation of due process over and over again? What more can you do? You can repeal the Patriot Act. Contact your state representatives, contact your senators, your congressmen, and say repeal this Patriot Act that gives the government free reign to basically abuse any man, any woman they suspect of anything. You can even sneeze and they'll be like, oh, he meant to do something.
Alhamdulillah. Oh no, Yarhamukallah. Allah. Oh my gosh, they're all chanting about God. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that the fear around Muslims has built these walls so high. It makes you wonder how difficult it's going to be to overcome these obstacles where there's so much prejudice, especially
with the current administration.
They're not even subtle about it, right? Like in the Obama years, it was at least quiet and back doors and stuff. But now it's right in your face. Now it's
right in your face. Yeah. As soon as Trump was voted in, we all went through those stages of grieving where we were just shocked, and then we were sad, and then we were angry, and then we finally had acceptance, So when I went to bed that night, I was shocked. When I woke up in the morning, and my kids were like, oh, who won? Because, in school in 4th, 5th grade, they're learning about the election. And I cried. I didn't expect to cry, but I cried that Trump won, because in my head, I'm like, oh my God, my husband has to go to trial when this man is president. What's going to happen to my husband? And the other 3 men, his brother got sentenced, but is there any way we can appeal that? Is there any way we can get that overturned? What about the 2 other innocent men? They have children. They have 3-4 kids. What are we supposed to do? We have to defend these men. And that's what our community needs to do, is these men like Ibrahim and men like the other defendants, men like Nick Young and Tariq Mahanna and Abu Ali, and Ali Tamimi, like I mentioned before, have to still be the topic of conversation.
Do you feel like the community has come together, or do you feel like there's fear in the community itself to say, hey, if we try to stand up for these men, maybe we'll get entrapped with them, or we'll get looped in, lassoed into...
Yeah, a lot of people have that fear. I know Irtaza, remember in the college days, if somebody got picked up, everybody was just kind of on edge. It's okay, just, put your head down and keep going. But now we can't do that. Like I said, it's 2017 and we're raising children. And what world are my children, are your children inheriting? If we don't stand up to injustices like this, what is left for them? Absolutely. The justice system is more about, persecution. It's not about prosecution. And we have to turn that around. 97% of cases get pled out because guys are just too afraid. They're like, oh man, I'm looking at life in prison. So I gotta plea. And when you plea out, you have to sign papers that say, I am guilty. Yeah. So, the wider community thinks that. They think, oh, well, he pled, so he must be guilty. It's like, no, they put you in such a desperate situation. If you're looking at life in prison, like my brother-in-law, to have any semblance to ever, see his children again, he's going to take that plea deal. 27 years, he still has a chance to see his children. Not his mother, unfortunately. Allah alam, obviously, but, she's very old. It's something we have to continuously talk about.
What about your local community and their interactions with you?
Alhamdulillah, our local, I always, since the day I got married and moved to Toledo, I hated Toledo. It was, I'm from big city Houston, and moving to little itty bitty town Toledo was really different for me, and I never liked it. And so when I moved to Dallas, I saw this big city, and it was just like, okay, alhamdulillah, I'm back in Texas, I'm back in home. I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd end up back in Toledo. I remember when I was donating all our winter coats and our snow boots, I was like, yes, I will never need these again. And I feel like Allah was like, shouldn't have said that. When I moved back to Toledo, like, subhanAllah, like, Ibrahim was such a pillar of that community, always helping people, always smiling in people's faces, that everybody rallied again, like, behind us. We had so much support, and for every bond hearing we've had, and we've had like 3 motions for bond, people have submitted, I've collected 20, 30 letters of support, and in all those letters of support, and I can tell you, honestly, in every single one, there's one common theme, and that is Ibrahim Muhammad would always have like this really cheesy, toothy smile. You would never see Ibrahim unless he had a smile on his face. That everybody has written that in their letters of support. Everybody, everywhere I go, they're wanting to buy me food or, take care of my children. They love my children. They're just very supportive. And, we've packed the courtroom, anytime Ibrahim's, been there. We had a lot of support, alhamdulillah. The support we've had after I published these couple of articles, I never imagined. And I did this all, Ibrahim didn't even know. I never told him over the phone, because obviously the phone calls are recorded. I don't think it's a security issue. I just never mentioned it to him. And when I finally told him, I was like, look, I made this petition, and I did it like maybe 36 hours before our third bond hearing, right? This past November. I did not think I could get 100 signatures. I was like, I'll be lucky if I get 100 signatures. In 36 hours, we got 9,000 signatures.
Mashallah.
Like, subhanAllah. And this is from all over the world. Wow. All over the world. When I told Ibrahim, he was just quiet. He was completely touched. He was humbled. He's just like, subhanAllah, he makes dua. When Ibrahim alayhi salam left his wife and his child in the desert, he made dua that Allah send your awliya, send people there to help my family, to protect my family. And that's exactly what's happening to my Ibrahim, where people are coming and rallying with us and helping his family, supporting his family. SubhanAllah, I would not be where I am. I would not be able to speak. I would not be able to write if it wasn't for the people who have stood with us. Alhamdulillah.
Sorry, I'm so emotional right now. I'm not even able to speak anymore, because SubhanAllah, like, you're right. Your story is so, it's your own, but in so many ways, it's all of us, the amazing qualities in your husband, we see that in our men. We see that in so many of the other men in our communities. And, I remember our kids playing together a few years ago when you had come to Chicago. And, I have a 4-year-old and I have an Ibrahim, and it's just too close to home. It's really not one of those things that you quote unquote hear about anymore. It's something that's really touching so many people's lives. And I think it's incredible, with all that you're going through, to be able to put it out there and to share it. It's really brave.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say something, and this is, usually we're really kind of self-critical of our community, but I agree with something Umaima said earlier. If you had situations like this 20 years ago, the wife of the brother or the parents of the brother, if it was someone single, they were usually treated like pariahs in the community. I mean, no one wanted to show support. Most people would just avoid that family. There would just be some chatter at the masjid, that person's husband got locked up or that person's son. But I think as a community, we realize the times we live in, that's just not an option. And I think, again, as someone who's a step, I'm close to it, but I'm still removed from it. I feel that the broader community has been very, very supportive of Ibrahim, of Umaima. I'm not even directly involved. And people call me all the time saying, how can we help Ibrahim? Hey, we know you know Umaima. What can we do? Is there something we can do? And so there's just, and I do the same thing Umaima said. I direct them to the petition, or, I'll tell them to stay in touch. If the brother's wife knows Umaima, I'll say, hey, maybe message her directly. But I have seen that ever since this situation happened. There's a lot of support. I think Umaima will agree with that as well.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Like I said, when we published, I never imagined this sort of response. And I was quiet for 2 years. I kept my mouth shut. I was, I wanted to give media attention. I wanted people to learn about this, and I wanted people to stand up and defend Ibrahim and other similar men like him. I just didn't know how. And I had one friend who was like, you have to write, you have to write, you have to write. And then I finally wrote something. And, we sent it to local papers in Toledo. Toledo has a small local newspaper. They didn't bite the bait, and it was like, where do I go from here? And, it was just knowing people and saying Muslim Matters, Brown Girl Magazine, can you all publish? Yeah. And the fact that they did, like, subhanAllah, like my social media blew up, my phone blew up, and I was like, whoa, I don't know these people, but people are contacting me. Do you need help?
Yeah,
what can we do?
And at that shout out, that's the important thing, I think, also about kind of intersectionality and alliances. Brown Girl Magazine, and I personally know Atiya Hassan. She's not related to me, but she's fantastic. She does great work. I think their magazine. There's just so many outlets nowadays to support people, like Muslim Matters, like Brown Girl, like just so many outlets online and in paper. Yeah.
I mean, social media can move mountains. That's what happened. SubhanAllah.
Has any national organization taken up this, like ACLU or?
I'm in contact with ACLU, but more on, we're discussing more the conditions of Ibrahim's detainment. His diet, his lack of an imam, a chaplain. He has no resources like that. Getting prayer rugs and getting food during Ramadan, things like that with ACLU. CARE, like I said, they do more like civil cases, civil rights, and this is a federal case, so this is kind of out of their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
We've been working with MLFA. A lot of these organizations I contacted, since day one when Ibrahim was arrested. And it's interesting that, people only really responded after I published. And I think that's what media does.
Yeah.
HuffPost picked up our story. I'm hoping, I have other friends who have contacts, and that's just really how all of this is kind of snowballing. It's like somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who can help you publish or who can interview or something. Yeah. So just through that, I'm getting more interviews. I'm writing more articles because people just want to hear the story.
Is there a legal precedence on how long they can hold him for without a trial or any type of legal?
You know what? Actually, on our Facebook page, I posted a story of a man who was detained for 8 years. He was detained for 8 years, no charges, and then finally they're like, "Oh, hey, we remember you. You can go ahead and walk." No charges ever filed. He sat in jail for 8 years.
That's ridiculous.
And that's a ridiculous violation.
Was he a Muslim person or?
No, he was African American.
Oh wow.
He was African American, and which is an argument that I always bring up with other people in other interviews. It's either you're African American and you get either shot on site, or you get a trial that's completely biased. Yeah. If you're Latino, you're a drug dealer, you're a rapist, right? Somebody's already said that about them. And my sister's in Arizona, where it's a huge Mexican population. And she's like, I can drive down the road and no cop is going to pull me over and ask for my passport. But in Arizona, they'll ask for your passport, your green card for any, somebody who looks Mexican, and they'll deport them, right? You see what's happening to the dreamers. Then you have Muslims. This is what happens to us. You get travel bans. You have the refugee crisis where people aren't, countries aren't letting in refugees. You see all sorts of prejudices all over the world against all sorts of minorities. We have the Native Americans. This is their land, man. We're like, not us, but 200 years ago, there were immigrants who came and settled on their land. You know, how's that any different from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? You come, you take their land, you kick them out. That's exactly what we did with the Native Americans. You know, I mean, the prejudice it's disgusting. It's something that has to change. Like, I just can't, like, it doesn't even make me sad. It's infuriating when I think about the future my kids are going to inherit. Where I'm like, I have to fix this now. And I think that's what's motivated me to finally speak about Ibrahim.
Yeah, I think it's important that we develop these characteristics of justice in our children. I know a lot of parents listen to our show, and I think that this needs to be really hammered home. And you can do it through, you know, the TV that they watch. You know, make sure they watch, you know, superhero type cartoons and put it in context for them, and not teach them like violence, but, you know, teach them a sense of justice and defend people who are being bullied at school. You can be that person who is a superhero, but not, you know, you don't have superpowers, but you can embody that
Robin
person.
Hood.
Yeah.
It's so funny, like, in American culture, if you actually look at the movies like Star Wars, right? It's the evil one is actually the big empire, and the good guys are actually the rebels, the ones that are fighting against, right?
Yeah.
And trying to overcome the evil. And yet, you know, in real life, when it plays out, it's so different, right?
Yeah.
I was like, no, we're the empire's good.
I was talking to my daughter just the other day and just telling her, I'm like, I'll be so disappointed in you, not in your bad grades or anything, or any type of misbehavior you do at school, but if you stand quiet while someone is being bullied at school, and you're just an onlooker, and you're not being someone who is an active participant in stopping what you're seeing, you know, this injustice that you're seeing, I will see myself as a failure as a father, that I didn't teach you that much, you know? And I think that if more parents can adopt this into their parenting and just infuse justice into their children. Just, I mean, I think that'll just go so far, you know, in the awareness in our community, in our social awareness, in our, you know, just our everyday dealings as human beings as well, you know?
Oh, they absolutely need that supplemental education, especially when they go to public school and then they just hear that, you know, they don't even hear the proper history of Native Americans or how that land was taken over, or any of the other minorities that were oppressed, or why African Americans communities are in you know, such disarray. They don't hear all the actual social dynamics that have happened, or, you know, the systemic oppression of certain minorities. So they need us to guide them in that social justice, in that, like, recognition of, okay, these are systems that were put in place, and this is how you disassemble those systems, right?
Oh yeah,
one
absolutely.
person at a time, one mindset at a time.
My kids go to public school, and anytime they learn something, like, you know, for example, when Thanksgiving rolled around, you know, and they're learning about the Native Americans, I had to debunk everything they learned at school. Oh, yeah. I was like, no, that's not how it happened. Yeah. Let me tell you how it happened. You know, and then I had meetings with teachers. I was like, what are you teaching these kids? And the kindergarten teacher, she, like, just graduated college. Okay. And I'm like, and she's like, well, you know, the Indians. And I was like, stop. Time out right there. And I was like, they're not Indians, man. They're Native American. I'm Indian. Okay. I'm from India. They're not Indian. I was like, Columbus was, they celebrate Columbus Day still in some schools, you know, and our schools in Ohio do. And so I had to tell my kids, I was like, no, Christopher Columbus was a mass murderer. He committed genocide. He killed the Native Americans. Stop calling them Indians. I had to sit down with the kids. I had to sit down with teachers, because we have to teach them the truth about injustices. And it starts with schools. And, you know, Irtaza's wife, you know, she's pretty outspoken about this. She's a homeschooler, or I should say she's, you know, unschooling. And, you know, to have these conversations with our children about injustices that are centuries old and yet are still happening now. Yeah. That's the only way we can change our kids' future, is to teach them the truth now and not be afraid of it. You know, we create these bubbles and we create these safe havens for them, and it's actually counterproductive. It's not really helping them.
To them. They won't be able to recognize injustice when it's right in front of them.
Yeah, exactly. My son was on the school bus a couple weeks ago, and the teacher came to me and she's like, they were on a field trip, and a girl sitting behind him, a sixth grader, he's in fourth grade, excuse me. Sixth grader asked him, "Are you Muslim?" And he said, "Yes." And she goes, "Are you sure?" And the teacher's like, this girl didn't mean to, she was not curious. She meant something else by it. And my son didn't know how to react. And he felt her words. He felt the tone of her voice. He felt her sarcasm. He felt,
she's trying to antagonize him.
Exactly. He started crying. He's a really soft kid. He starts crying. So the moment the teacher said, "Your son cried," I lost it. I was completely in tears because I know how soft and tenderhearted my son is. And I told the teachers, I was like, look, had that child, that girl who's bullying him, said anything else, had she said the capital T word, had she said something about terrorism or anything, I would not be crying. I would have a whole nother set of emotions. Yeah. And I told him, and the principal was really amazing. And she sat my son down and she's like, nobody has the right to make you feel inferior. Nobody has the right to make you feel confused about your identity. Nobody has the right to talk to you disrespectfully about your religion, about your ethnicity, about your nationality, anything. You never, ever, ever let anybody talk down to you, and you speak up about it. And that's what we need to do. That's what we can tell this audience is, you see somebody hurting, you see somebody in need, you help them. And especially when it comes to legal cases, we get really, really, really afraid. We get really nervous. Some of us, maybe rightfully so, but how long, we learned something in psychology back in college is that, if you see a car accident, you assume the next person is going to call 911. And everybody assumes that, the other lady's going to call 911, the other guy's going to call 911, and nobody ends up calling 911. That's what's happening in our communities. We're like, whatever, this sister might be in need and she has like 6 kids and her husband is African American and he's in prison, whatever. She's probably on welfare. She's okay. She's good to go.
The bystander effect, yeah.
Families need support and we need to rally together. That's why our Ummah, that's why we're weakening. We have to rally together. We have to lock arms. Doesn't matter where you're from, what language you speak, what your ethnicity is, what your nationality is.
Yeah. Well, props to this principal in small town Toledo, Ohio, with the climate, what it is today, to be able to know that, we have real people in public schools, in these positions of authority with our children that are going to reinforce these messages to them. That's wonderful.
Yeah. You know what? Small town Toledo, voted blue. I have to say that. Secondly, I have never, I have never faced any sort of, hatred, any sort of, bullying, any sort of negativity in that city. I saw this one guy who was following me weird at Costco, and I was like, okay, he keeps staring at me, and he's his cart is really close. Either he's going to ram it right into me, or I was getting very nervous. And then, it was never go to Costco on a Saturday, but 4 kids, and he overtakes my cart and he stops dead in front of me. And I got so scared, and he turned around. He's like, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say you have a beautiful family." And aww. I was so taken aback. I fumbled my words and I mumbled a thank you, and he walked away and he left me in tears. And I looked for him all over that store and I couldn't find him. And I was like, SubhanAllah, the world is, good people are the majority. Good people are the majority, and we can prevail over any sort of hatred or evil in this world. Bismillah ta'ala.
Umaima, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. I hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants this time that you gave to our podcast and blesses it with something good that comes of it. And hopefully our listeners hop on to the show notes and sign up to the petition. And if you guys have anything else you guys can do, I'm sure, Umaima, is there a way to reach out to you? Can our listeners contact you over some kind of social media at all?
We have a Free Ibrahim page.
Okay.
Free Ibrahim Now on Facebook. Just post their message on there. I have a lot of people who message on there. I honestly did not know how to work a page on Facebook when I first created that page. But alhamdulillah, I've learned my way. And we have an amazing response, and you can totally contact me there. I'm the person, obviously, the admin on that page.
Cool. We'll make sure that all those links are in the show notes, so please be sure to go ahead and check it out. Again, Umaima, thank you so much for your time today.
For the opportunity. I mean, thank you so much. To Irtaza, to Brother Imran, to Summer, thank you so much.
For questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach us at themadmamluks@gmail.com. You can also reach us on Facebook or Twitter. Make sure to visit our website, www.themadmamluks.com. And don't be shy to click away on that donation button. For my co-hosts Summer Zahra and Irtaza Hassan, my name is Sim. Assalamu alaikum.